There are four main classes in Terraria. There's the warrior, using melee weapons such as swords, flails, spears, and boomerangs that can deal massive damage when up close to an enemy. Rangers rely on a variety of guns and bows to deal huge amounts of damage at a distance. Mages have a large arsenal of powerful spells that excel at taking down groups of enemies. And then there's the summoner. Summoners are limited to a couple staves that summon creatures that deal minimal damage to enemies, and all the summoner can do while their useless minions chip away at a target is to run away. Now if that doesn't sound like gameplay, I don't know what does. All jokes aside, the summoner plays much differently than the other classes in Terraria, but in such a way that it strips a lot of the fun out of progression. We're first going to talk about why a summoner class is busted and isn't fun to play, and then talk about how Relogic or modders could fix it. First and foremost, progressing through the game is hard for a summoner. All the other classes have many early game options for weapons, and many of which can be crafted as soon as you find some basic ore. But the first summoner weapon that is able to be found right at the start of the game, the Slime Staff, has a 1 in 10,000 chance to be dropped by slimes. Nothing gets a new playthrough going than a long grinding session. The next weapon that can be acquired by summoners is the Hornet Staff, which requires the player to defeat the Queen Bee, a boss fought well into pre-hard mode. The Hornet Staff isn't even that good at this point in the game, having a measly base damage of 9. Then there's the Imp Staff. This staff is actually a viable weapon, unlike the other options, and can easily carry you through the rest of pre-hard mode, but requires a Nightmare or Crimtane pickaxe to collect the materials for, which is obtained also around the same point of progression as the Queen Bee. That leaves only one viable weapon in all of pre-hard mode. Oh wait, did I forget to mention that there are only 3 pre-hard mode summoner weapons? I didn't go over the summoner weapons found after killing the Wall of Flesh, but the progression is very similar, where there really is only one viable staff for a long chunk of time, which is replaced by another. Another factor that can make the summoner class such a chore to play is how difficult it can be to obtain its weapons. Not counting the Tavern Keeper or Post-Moonlord staves, there are a total of 15 staves, and only 7 of which can be crafted. The other 8 rely on random drops from enemies. Compare this to the warrior, who has over 50 weapons available before killing the Wall of Flesh. Even the throwing class, also known as the class that's getting removed in update 1.3.6, has almost double the amount of weapons that the summoner can use, which just goes to show how underdeveloped summoner is. So one of the biggest reasons why people decide to play summoner is because the idea of amassing an army of creatures to have them do their bidding is very appealing. The issue with this, however, is that almost every single summon available is the same. There are 2 main types of summons: those that try to ram enemies, and those that shoot them at a distance. Where's the variety? A miniature tornado that shoots sharks should be different than an imp. And before you start saying, what about the other classes? The ranger just has a bunch of bows and guns. Now it's true that the ranger weapons do share the core function of shooting projectiles, but a lot of them accomplish that task in different ways that make them more interesting. Sure, you could use a regular bow, but what about one that unleashes bees on the target? What about one that makes it rain arrows from the sky? How about a bow merged with a shotgun? Although these weapons all share the core concept of shoot the bad guys, they all do it in their own unique way, which is something that can't be said for the summoner weapons. Now what makes a game fun for a player? It's gameplay. It's important for a game to have solid gameplay to keep the player engaged and encourage them to continue playing. However, it's important for a game to mix up its gameplay every once in a while so it doesn't become stale and the player starts to lose interest. Terraria accomplishes this by offering different class choices to the player, each with their own unique style of play. Warrior, Ranger, and Mage have interesting gameplay that all require the game to be tackled in a different way from one another. Summoner, however, doesn't have deep gameplay like the other classes, and mostly consists of summoning your minions at the start of a battle, and then running away while they chip away at the enemy. This process is repeated hundreds of times throughout the game as a summoner, and gets stale quite quickly. Now, you could always use a weapon from another class while running away, such as a gun or a spell tome, but they don't get the benefits of summoner armor like increased damage, critical strike chance, and others, making them far weaker than they would be if used by another class. So this just leaves the summoner to run away from the monsters the entire game, while the other classes get to have fun. So at the moment, the summoner class lacks smooth progression, has weapons that are difficult to obtain and all play similarly, and has tedious gameplay. Is there some way it can be fixed? Well, some major changes would have to be made, but I believe the class can be saved. First, there need to be more summoner weapons available to the player at any stage in the game. Expanding their arsenal can add much needed variety to the class and give people the opportunity to customize their loadouts how they please. In fact, it would help a lot if Relogic just took some mage weapons such as the Staff of Earth or the Nimbus Rod and changed its damage type to summon. These weapons conjure up an object, which is what a summoner should be able to do. Cast a variety of objects with different uses to do their bidding. I also believe that a new kind of summoner weapon is needed besides staves. This new type of weapon would have to be very different from the current weapons and encourage the player to get up close and personal with enemies to prevent all encounters from turning into a snooze fest. What I think would work well is a kind of charm or hex. These new spells would be able to deal direct elemental damage when up close to an enemy, or inflict them with a status condition. Some could shoot out projectiles like the Shadow Flame Hex Doll. As long as these weapons are distinct from other classes' weapons, this new style weapon should work well in the summoner's arsenal. I'd real quickly like to mention that there are a ton of mods out there that add more weapons to the summoner class. This does give the player more options for weapons should they choose to summoner, but in my opinion, most mods just add weapons that are more the same. They all suffer from having minions that either shoot projectiles or ram the enemy, which leads to that stale gameplay I was talking about. There needs to be a different, more interesting way to play Summoner, rather than just expanding their supply of weapons. The Summoner isn't a well fleshed out class at the moment. It has some major flaws, like boring gameplay, little weapon variety, and more. The class does have great potential and could be a unique experience compared to the rest of the classes, but in its current state, unless the Summoner is reworked, it'll be an unviable side class that will be neglected and forgotten.